Eleven.
Hello, everyone. This is Data Driven Chat, and today we have a real treat for you. Sylvie Delacroix is with us, finally. After several months of waiting, I know she's a very busy person. So Sylvie is a professor of law and ethics at the Birmingham Law School at University of Birmingham. She's also fellow at the Alan Turing Institute, and she's also Mozilla fellow. And her interests are ethics and artificial intelligence. And, she's just one of my role models. She's an amazing person. And I'm so happy to have her today with us. Hi, Sylvie. How are you?
Hi, Ghana. So you make me blush. You should say these things. Great to speak today. I'm thrilled.
To kick off our discussion, let's just start with you. So tell us, how did you develop this interest in law and ethics and AI? This combination, because I think it only came into fashion recently, but you've been doing it for quite some time. So can you tell us about your personal journey into law and ethics of AI?
So actually, it happened to be the case that I was designing a new course in UCL in law and ethics. And I decided that actually I had to include a part on data ethics and ethics of automation within my course, because these issues were becoming more and more prevalent. And I couldn't responsibly teach final year law students without telling them a little bit about data ethics and the ethics of automation. So that's how it started. It's out of a teaching concern initially. And then I organized the first workshop on the ethics of automated systems in the professions. That was in UCL. I've lost track of time now, some time ago. And actually, I should also credit Anthony Finkelstein. He was the Dean of Engineering in UCL when I created the Center for Ethics and Law. And he was very enthusiastic participant to the Sinktanks I organized. And one of those think tanks was on the ethics of automated systems in healthcare with BAE. BAE had preferred to do a think tank on automated systems in healthcare rather than drones for understandable reasons. And Anthony was there, and he actually was really interesting because I remember this was at least 10 years ago, more actually. And he said, Sylvie, you really should look at data, And at the time, I was doing lots of other things, and I was like, yeah, but I didn't really get on with it. It's really, that workshop was a deciding moment on the automated systems. And that's where also I met Neil Lawrence, who was a guest. I didn't know him very well at the time. Things took on from there. And Mireille Hildebrand also played a big role because, again, by chance, she needed someone on a European grant, someone from UCL, from the law school, because the feedback they had gotten was that it needed a legal expertise person. And so I was embarked on a project on smart objects. And that's how also I started learning a lot more about these things.
Mm-hmm. So, you mentioned quite a few people, and I think I met Anthony twice. So first time we had a roundtable at Turing, and the second time it was at COGEX. And he's a very inspirational person. So I can tell that he probably was really great at kind of directing young researchers at the time when he was at UCL. I think he's still at UCL, right?
He still has a honorary position or something like that. And he was because the law school was quite insular, and actually I was made a honorary lecturer. At the time I was a reader, I've forgotten anyway. I had a honorary appointment in computer science, which I was very proud of, because at the time, really, frankly, and I still don't know very much about computer science at all, but it was very cool to be a honorary member of computer science at the same time as the law school. At the time, it was very unheard of, really, in UCL.
So your research interest on your website says that you are interested in machine ethics. So can you tell us how did you become interested in machine ethics, and what is it? What is machine ethics for those people who never heard of it before?
Machine ethics is one of those umbrella terms that can mean a lot of things. I think you can include all sorts of concerns in that. What had got me interested was initially research on smart objects. So that was really the idea that what happens when we start sharing smart objects. There's automated cars, but we could also have all sorts of smart homes, and then you have Airbnb smart home. What happens with the settings and the personalization, etc. So that's the kind of question that got me intrigued. And here, clearly, Michael Hildebrand's influence was very important. I have quite a range of interests, really, because there's that side, which is my interest is really on trying to question the assumption that a lot of computer scientists make, that optimization is always good. That basically, if I optimize the way you spend your time in the gym, and I'm telling you, Sylvie, you should spend 5 minutes on the CrossFit and 5 minutes on the weight, then you will waste less time and you will have a better life. And that principle applies to lots of things, lots of optimization in that.
Yeah, I think in economics we're also guilty as charged, because in economics, like, people try, let's make these decisions more efficient, or let's make people more rational. And I'm like, do we actually want to make people more rational? How do you know? What the consequences are going to be?
I find that fascinating because it's there are fields where, arguably, there's no big harm that could come from me spending more organized time at the gym. But as soon as you move from that to, say, which friends you should meet, and whether I should divert the call from my husband because I should take a call from, I don't know, some random person so that's starting to completely narrow down my horizons and the realm of events that could happen to me. And this, I have something, I think I'm quite concerned by the general narrowing down effect and its effect on agency. And by agency, I mean our capacity to see how the world could be different and how it could be made better. And a lot of people take that for granted. A lot of people say, yeah, of course, we can all see how the world could be different and how it could be made better. But actually, I think it's very easy. We're also creatures of habit, and we love, complying with patterns of behavior. And I think there's nothing wrong with habits. Actually, habits can be wonderful things. But from time to time, we need to retain this ability to wake up and see that, actually, the way we usually do things is not quite right. And my intuition, which drives a lot of my work, especially the book on habitual ethics that I'm still not finished, but that book is really about saying, look, there are times when we really need to be able to stand back from habits, question them, and potentially see how we do things differently. And the problem with both philosophers, lawyers, computer scientists less so, is that we tend to take that capacity for granted. So we tend to say, yes, of course we can stand back and question things. And actually, I like to compare this capacity, so agency, to a muscle that can go limp through lack of exercise. And so I think the general trend towards optimization and maximum efficiency in terms of decision making has an effect on what I would call this muscle exercise that's needed in order to retain this ability to take stock and potentially change things.
So when do you think the book is going to be out? I'm also in anticipation.
Well, yeah, a lot happens partly on. I mean, it depends a lot also on the lockdown and whether my son goes back to school at some point. Right. But hopefully, I think my aim is to send the manuscript by December to my publisher. It has been much delayed, but actually it's becoming a better book, I think. So yes. Hopefully.
so hopefully there is a silver lining to that. Yeah. I guess many people. We are going to talk a little bit about COVID a bit later. So obviously you had a lot of awards, including Leverhulme Prize, and I probably don't even know all of them. But if you had to pick one most important thing that you have achieved during your career, what would you pick?
Yeah. I think actually the thing that I'm proudest of in terms of achievements is the creation of the Center for Ethics and Law. That was launched just a month before giving birth. Bad timing. But it was, at the time I was just a very young lecturer, and I managed to get sponsorship from 9 big companies, including Nestle, AstraZeneca, HSBC, Shell, etc., who paid a membership fee to basically attend think tanks. And the idea behind the think tanks was to stop the format of academics lecturing corporates and to say, actually, we should reverse that. And so the idea was that I would go and talk to it was AstraZeneca or whatever, and I would have 2 or 3 meetings where my aim was to tease down one case study, so a real life case study, which was incredibly hard to get from them, of an ethical dilemma that they felt they could have handled differently. And so very interestingly, I was supposed to be the philosopher there, well, lawyer too, and they always tended to stay at very abstract concepts and very abstract analysis. And I was like, I want the facts, I want the gritty, gritty details. And so I learned a lot from that. And then the think tanks were designed along 3 lines of discussion, and it was half academics, half corporates, with many disciplines represented, including, say, Anthony Finkelstein made sure that people from engineering were there. And so I thought that was probably, I think that's the achievement I'm proudest of, actually.
Yeah, so I just want to say to people who haven't heard about the center, that's in UCL when you were working in UCL.
Sorry,
No worries. Yeah, so yeah, just in case someone wants to Google the center, and there will be a link underneath this video as well, so you can go and check out what the center does, still exists and thriving.
Yeah, I don't know actually. I haven't followed what it has become so much. I think partly because it's hard to it's like a baby that you have to let go to some extent. So yeah.
So the question that I really wanted to ask you is, so there is a lot of effort in trying to build a trustworthy AI. But again, I think very few people ask themselves, do we need trustworthy AI? Does AI have to be trustworthy? So what's your take on this? So because a lot of people believe that we need to build an AI that we can trust. Is that an important problem in principle? And should we spend time on this?
So I would start by questioning what AI is anyway, because I still not sure there seems to be very many definitions of AI. And that's why I try to speak more of automated systems as an umbrella term, and then be more specific. Is it a machine learning system? Or is it what kind of machine learning? And so really a lot depends on the details. And I find that in many ways, the modalities of interaction between humans and computer systems, for me, are the most important. So trust. So I would hope that we can develop modalities of interaction that allow for sufficient input on our part. And by input, I don't just mean enter a question, say. By input, I mean also that we contribute to the learning phase of the system, the ongoing learning of the system. So that's something that's hard to do, I realize. And there were so-called interactive machine learning methodologies at some point that were more fashionable than they are now. But I'm very intrigued by this concept of interactive machine learning for the simple reason that my intuition, and I might be wrong, but my intuition is that if we could crack this, if we could really make room for genuine interactive process in the continuous learning of the machine, then actually it's possible that the trust aspect becomes secondary. And that if we constantly play a role in how the feedback that's given to the machine, etc. I say machine just to be vague because there's also then I think trust is of course important, and there have to be, don't get me wrong, I think there have to be red lines, so there always have to be fail-safe mechanism, especially a switch off button. Yes, pretty important. So I'm not advocating for the absence of concerns about trustworthiness. I'm just tempted to challenge the orthodoxy by saying, actually, maybe trust could become an important concern, but not the primary concern if we were to develop more interactive methodologies.
So when we are thinking about trust, so I work a lot, obviously, with human beings, and
Yes.
so I kind of I'm kind of constantly asking myself: is there really a difference? Like, what is the difference between trust in an individual and trust in a machine? Is there like we do observe quite a lot of differences in the way people behave in experiments when they know they're playing against computer and when they know that they're playing against a human being, for example. So I know there is a difference in behavior, but I have no idea, and I doubt anybody in experimental field has, in behavioral science, has an idea why that happens. Are there any hints in philosophy and ethics on this? Like, what is the difference here between trust in machine and trust in an individual, or other differences?
So this is an interesting question, actually, because different philosophers will give you very different answers to that, depending on how closely they adhere to a so-called intellectualist tradition. So, there's a spectrum among philosophers depending on the relative role you give to intuitions and non-cognitive processes in the way in which we may grant trust to an entity, whether it's a machine or a person. And so what I find quite interesting here is that at one extreme, you will have some people who insist that trustworthiness is acquired on the basis of demonstrable characteristics that need to be verified, and this verification process will rely on cognitive processes alone, right? So that's one end of the spectrum. At the other end, you will have people who are very much challenging this cognitivist tradition and say, that's bullshit. Most of the time, especially when we make important decisions of moral import, we only rationalize afterwards, and our decision is very much based, let's say 90% of the time, on very intuitive grasp of the situation. And it could be a person, it could be an entity. And so then comes the question, but what do you mean by these intuitions? Because actually, intuitions, I think it's very simplistic to present them as just non-rational. I think intuitions are informed by rational processes in many ways, and we grow in our intuitions, etc. So then you have a much more complex picture if you start to draw a middle position where you have to try and explain the interaction between cognitive processes and non-cognitive processes in the way we may grant the characteristic of trustworthiness to something. And I think I find that a really fascinating question is, are there differences in the relative role of non-cognitive versus cognitive processes when we deal with a human on one hand and a non-human entity on the other hand? That is a fascinating question, because it's possible. Some people suggest that that it's like navigating blind when we interacting with a non-human entity. All our intuitive marks of there are things we can't explain that we feel warrant trustworthiness somehow, that induce trust on our part, sometimes wrongly, but and so we don't have those same flags when it comes to a non-human entity. So these are fascinating questions that I'm not an expert in, but I would love to read more about, because I think that's a field for research that needs to be pushed further and have more interdisciplinary input, actually. I wish philosophers actually were contributing more to this debate.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, that. It would be great if we at one point could answer these questions. I think that would be awesome. And definitely there is a lot of importance in identifying, what. So what are the main characteristics of our communication with machines and with other humans? Yeah, so I don't think we are even there. Not to mention that we don't know much about trust, right? So I know that you work a lot on personal data, and you are one of the, I think, best experts in the country on decision support systems and ethics. In terms of, if I asked you to identify maybe three major, I mean, it doesn't have to be three. I mean, you can pick a number. Several major risks associated with AI, however you want to define it, and personal data. What would be your answer to that?
Okay, first, I'm not one of the top experts in the country. I have to challenge that. Yeah.
Okay.
But so
well, I can in my book anyway.
okay. Thank you. Three things I'm most worried about. So I would distinguish, right? Because it's too wide otherwise. There are concerns about the way the debate is framed about data for the moment in data governance.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are concerns about AI. Now, of course, they are connected because without data, there's no AI. So, but when it comes to data governance, okay, one of the things I spend a lot of time on is to try and challenge the idea. So one assumption seems to drive a lot of the debates currently taking place. And that assumption says there's a necessary trade-off between, on one hand, the goods that can be achieved through data sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm including all sorts of types of data sharing. And on the other hand, the good that can be achieved by protecting individuals from the vulnerabilities that stem from data sharing. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that a lot of people, instead of saying it in a complicated way, like I just said, by using the word vulnerabilities, etc., a lot of people just say the good of privacy as a shortcut. And, the word privacy is starting to really run my patience thin because privacy is an umbrella term that can be used to refer to an amazingly diverse range of concerns and aspirations. It can be used for almost anything. I mean, if you unpack the way privacy is used as a value in different discourses, honestly, it's quite staggering the range of concerns and aspirations it covers. And so I think it's unhelpful as a term. And we need to be more specific in what we mean by consent for privacy. Mm-hmm. And that, in part, has played a role in delaying progress on unpacking exactly what kinds of vulnerabilities stem from data sharing. And I think those vulnerabilities are diverse and they are evolving. That is the fascinating part. It's actually the way in which we constantly leak data about ourselves when we go online, etc., is generating vulnerabilities that are changing. And so that in itself is a fascinating topic for research. And so I am an advocate of being more specific and saying, you know what, privacy, you need to be more specific. It's just not helpful to just talk about privacy and unpack exactly what you mean. So that's for one side of the equation, which is the good that can be achieved through protecting individuals. The other side of the equation, which is the goods that can be achieved through data sharing. Again, the unfortunate thing is that when you listen to the debates in data governance, there seems to be this bizarre assumption that it's either or. So there are the people who campaign for more data sharing, and then the people who campaign for more protection, typically GDPR experts, etc. But actually, I am a firm believer in the idea that this is not an either or, that it's not a necessary trade-off, and that the only reason we are assuming it's a necessary trade-off is because we haven't developed the right kind of infrastructure that allows for merging those two concerns, that acknowledges the need for data sharing to achieve all sorts of important public goods and also social goods and group solidarity, etc. And on the other hand, also takes very seriously the need to protect people from vulnerabilities that stem from data sharing. And here I've worked on data trust as one solution, as a one way of merging those two very equally important concerns. But data trust are, of course, not the only way of bringing those two concerns together. There's all sorts. Yeah, there's data commons, data co-ops. It really depends on the purpose that you're trying to achieve. So data trust are, I think, very good in order to enable groups of people to come together and pool together the rights they have over their data and basically acquire a voice in a political process that at the moment is very exclusive. Yeah, a very tiny number of people are making decisions about our data reliant futures. When you think of the fact that in the 19th century, only few people had the right to vote. and the right to vote was conditioned upon basically ownership, freehold of land. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so what did people do in order to extend the right to vote to more people? Well, they pooled together, in this case, money in order to acquire a piece of land, which was then cut into little parcels. And so instead of having one person having the right to vote, you had potentially 500.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that is helpful. I just think because it's helpful to understand data trust, the logic behind it. It's also to say, well, by pooling together the rights you have over your data, you suddenly become a much more important voice, because on your own, your data is not that significant, not that important. But once you pool together the data and the rights you have over your data of a large number of people, suddenly you have leverage. You have leverage to negotiate better terms and conditions from service providers. And you also have potentially the ability to monitor data sharing agreements. Sorry, I've talked too long.
No. It's good. That's good. Yeah, I was gonna ask you about data trust next, but I think you already gave us a very good definition of it. Yeah, I guess there are kind of a couple of things that I kind of want to pick out from what you said, and indeed we have quite a few alternatives. But again, I maintain that you are one of the best experts in the country on this topic, because I think you and Neil Lawrence, in your paper on data trust, you came up with a solution that actually works. Because oftentimes, you go to these conferences. Again, this is my personal opinion. A lot of people talk in general terms. We need to protect, like you said, whatever we mean by privacy, whatever we mean by personal data. That again could be defined in 100,000 different ways. But you and Neil in this paper, again, that people will be able to find underneath this video, basically you outlined a practical way of doing it. Like I can actually see how this could work, because I was working, for example, at a project called Hub of All Things, which kind of had similar idea behind it, but I guess the idea there is that people need to come together and have like this agreement between themselves that they're going to have data on their private clouds and all that kind of things. But it's very difficult to pull off in practice, because you need some representatives, some leaders who understand things about data, because most people do not understand the data very well, right? But I think what was striking about your paper, and what I really like, that you said, it could be a community of people that are really concerned and have the maturity to kind of understand that the data is being used by corporations. But equally, it could be, I don't know, an entity and even a private company that takes kind of this responsibility for people. So I like how you provided these different avenues. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of what went behind the thinking of this, and how did you? Because I think this is, to be honest, I think this is the only thing that I heard that would work in practice. I haven't heard anything else that would work in practice. Normally, it's like this woolly, voodoo things, like we need to do something, or let's have some sort of new declaration of digital rights or something like this. But it's never concrete, So you proposed a concrete tool, right?
Yeah. Well, so it started really from randomly, because I was having coffee in Cafe Nero, of all places, and Neil was there too, and we started chatting. And after a few chats, we decided to actually write a paper together, and it became a paper on data trust. So that was a nice story. I should say first that the word data trust has been used and misused. So initially, Neil came up with the term actually quite some time ago, I think 2016, something like that, in a Guardian article. And then it was used in the whole Peasantry report that was published 2 years ago to outline the priorities for an AI strategy for the UK government. And there, the word data trust appeared. Unfortunately, it was used in a way that does not reflect what data trust is really supposed to mean. Because in that report, it's basically all about empowering entities, typically companies, but they need not be, let's say, organizations, to responsibly share data by relying on a repeatable framework of terms and conditions. Now, that's great. I don't get me wrong. I'm a fan of, it's true that a lot of companies don't have the kind of legal team that would allow them to do data sharing well. And so having repeatable frameworks, terms, and conditions is a good idea. And so that's a horizontal structure, but that's a contractual structure. So it has nothing to do with trust law, except there has been a case. So shortly after the whole Pesenti report was published, I think it's the Truata data trust was formed with MasterCard among, and in this case, it looks like, I haven't looked into great detail into the details of this, but it looks like it is genuinely using trust law as a framework. But it is very unclear to me why they need trust law. They could achieve the same with contract. So this is a proviso because we are finally making progress 2 years down the line. Now, I am part of a group that's actually headed by Dame Wendy Hall, who has very nicely acknowledged the fact that she wasn't as precise as she should have been in that report on data trust. And now there's a working group that's going to publish a report in December where we're trying to outline different options for data stewardship, and data trust is one option. And there's also contractual terms, and then there's also data commons. And so here we're really making progress in terms of being clear about, a precise use of terms, if you see what I mean. It's kind of matters. Now, practically speaking, a data trust, the key thing is that the data trustee has to have a fiduciary responsibility to exercise the data rights of the people in the trust in a way that is faithfully reproducing the aims and purposes of the trust, right? And that means that these fiduciary responsibilities demand an absence of conflict of interest. So you cannot, for instance, have a company director who has responsibility towards shareholders who would also be have fiduciary responsibilities towards the people in the trust. Why? Because if the shareholders demand that the data be monetized, say, then you have a conflict of interest. Right. And so that's one thing that's important to highlight, is that in the US at some point, there were initiatives that tried to push data trust by saying, oh, we should give tax incentives to companies in return for them accepting fiduciary responsibilities towards the data of the, and that's just nonsense, because actually you can't have a fiduciary responsibility if you're also responsible to your shareholders. So in this, you have to understand that a data trustee has to be an independent intermediary, basically, between us, the data subjects, and then the data controllers. Now, there's all sorts of, it could be a charity that appoints data trustees. I think a company, for instance, let's say Emirates. Yeah, Emirates was interested in creating what they call a data trust, and we had, anyway, here the option was to say, what if we then sponsored the creation of ideally more than one data trust, so that you give a choice to your customers and say, look, depending on your aspirations and attitude to risk, you can choose between X, Y, and Z data trust. And we Emirates have so the data rights are exercised by a data trustee that has no relationship to Emirates. It's very important that they be completely independent. So that can be a way for companies to basically regain the trust of their customers with their data, and then facilitate better data sharing. There are many models, yeah. So there's also the question that many people are not even aware of the fact that they're leaking data on a daily basis.
Right, exactly.
And so what do you do about, say, the 85% of the population that's just clueless and doesn't care? And then comes the question, should you create a default data trust where, in the absence of choice, people are assigned to a default data trust that would be held to very strict standards, and you would need an oversight body, etc. Possibly. I mean, there are risks, of course, because you don't want to end up with a mammoth data trust, which would acquire a lot of power potentially. I mean, if 85% of the population in the UK were to be put in a default data trust, you can imagine that's a lot of data and hence a lot of power.
Right.
So that's why we're advocating a diversity of data trust, so that people ideally because of the need to choose between the data trust and another one, it would raise awareness across the general population of the fact that, yes, they are leaking data on a daily basis and choices need to be made. And then it has to be very easy to switch from one trust to another by exercising the portability and access and erasure rights. That's key to our proposal. To say it's a bit like shopping between different. Even pension schemes. Yeah, some people have choice between different pension schemes.
Right, exactly.
So you could think of data trusts like that, and in a way, the comparison with pension schemes is also valid because of the fact that data trusts, just like pensions, are based on the premise that people don't have a good understanding of the long-term risks that they're taking by sharing data most of the time. It's the same with pensions. A lot of people don't realize the risks that come from not saving for their old age. And so that's why pensions were made compulsory.
Right.
So you could then use that argument and say, actually, maybe the same should be done for data trusts. But then the question comes, so who funds that? Is that the public infrastructure then, etc.? I don't want to talk too much, but there's lots of questions that come up then, of course, about insurance, liability, etc.
So what happened with that initiative with Emirates? Are they proceeding with this? I don't know if you can share this.
No, Emirates, I was just giving that. It's an example that came through my mind. We didn't pursue and this did not go forward. What is happening, though, is that several charities, including Luminate and Mozilla, are getting together to create a Data Futures Lab that will fund pilots, so data trust pilots. And I'm talking, this is all happening as we speak, basically. So it's interesting. I think it's a good thing that at the moment, it's mainly charities that are getting into these initiatives to fund pilots, because I think it's very important that we learn what works and what doesn't work, given the risks at stake. And so in an ideal scenario, I would have a mix of both private and public actors creating a variety of data trusts. So that just like in medicine, you have private medicine and public medicine, because it's a need for everybody. You could have the same for data trust effectively.
Yeah, I think this is, again, a very important point. And we just recently saw how Google and Apple were kind of making statements about proximity apps and how, this could be not privacy preserving. Exactly, right? And I think there is also a lot of... there are a lot of questions around. It's good that they are thinking about it, but on the other hand, should the companies be raising this, or should the individuals be raising this? And like you said, I think the key is to actually raise awareness, that about data and data usage. So that kind of brings us nicely to the topic of COVID, and you already mentioned that has an effect on your life with your book and everything. Yes. But I wanted to ask you more about, ethics questions. Like, do you think there are any questions that appeared during this coronavirus crisis that were not present before, or maybe some new, some existing issues that were particularly highlighted by the current crisis?
Yeah, so this is, of course, a big question, and I actually have 3 minutes left to wrap this up. But I think, if anything, that many things have come to light under this COVID crisis. The most obvious thing is that is the lack of infrastructure, the lack of data sharing infrastructure. Right, we can't just rely on top-down regulation. We also need bottom-up empowerment structures, basically. And I wish we were a bit more ahead with the Data Trust project. If we had been, I would have hoped that we could have linked those apps with a genuine variety of data trusts to enable people to be able to share data without basically playing Russian roulette. I'm exaggerating, but without having to blindly trust whoever is storing that data. It was too early. We had interesting discussions actually with public actors in this field, and it was concluded that it was just too risky to try and create a data trust in an emergency to try and solve a problem that is very live today. So I think that's the main conclusion to me, is that it's shown, if anything, the dramatic need for bottom-up
infrastructure.
infrastructure. And I think that message is being received. We published a letter in Financial Times, actually, that was helpful because we got lots of interesting feedback from that. And I think watch this space. I really hope this COVID crisis does, we come to that doesn't perdure for too long. Yeah, and I do hope that we can create those pilots that I trust in a constructive and considered way, basically. Yeah.
Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you one last question. This is a traditional question that I always ask at the end, and it's a difficult one. So if I ask you to recommend one book to read and one film to watch, what would be your recommendations?
Oh la la, that's difficult. Oh, bon, okay. For the film, you're going to hate me because I'm going to give you a title that nobody has heard about. It's Le Collier Perdu de la Colombe. So that's in French. And it's a film I saw a very long time ago in the Middle East. The scene is in the Middle East. Anyway, that's for the film, Le Collier Perdu de la Colombe, for those of you who speak French. And then the book, well, I'll tell you what, for a philosophy book, recent philosophy book, because I think that's a book that's accessible to non-philosophers. There's Andrea San Giovanni Dignity book that was published 2 years ago that I think is really worth reading because he tries to challenge the idea that it tries to unpack basically what stands behind our concern for dignity, to be more concrete about it. And I think that's a very important book.
Well, Sylvie, thank you so much for finding the time. I know that you're very busy, and really, thank you. And I hope this is not the last conversation because I have a long list of questions, and I think only got through half of them.
Sorry, we'll do another one. I love chatting as well, so it was great.
No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good luck with the book. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cool. See you. Bye.
Bye.